In the heart of southern England, Britain's newest national park rises out of the ocean. The South Downs. Its rolling hills stirred William Blake to write the words for the Jerusalem anthem. This ancient land has been shaped by people since the end of the last ice age. As I journey through the seasons, I'll be exploring its rich history, landscapes, and wildlife.
Look at this. It's one of the most iconic views on the planet.
And I'll be meeting with the people who live and work in England's mountains green.
They've got their own way. They want to open.
My journey follows the entire length of these hills along the South Downs Way, and it begins close to my home on Firle Beacon at the end of winter.
This whole area was once a huge dome of chalk created by the same tectonic forces that pushed the Alps and the Himalayas up out of the ground. And at the end of the last ice age, a huge swathe of meltwater carved out the heart of the Downs, leaving the Thames Valley to the north, and here, the South Downs. When man returned after the last ice age 10,000 years ago, he would have walked along this ridge, which is now the South Downs Way, and he must have thought, this is paradise. There was fresh water coming up out of the ground through the chalk aquifers. The rivers would have been full of fish. And the forests which stretched down on the side of these slopes would have been game. And of course there was flint to create arrowheads for hunting.
Around 7,000 years ago, Neolithic man began to clear the forest for grazing and to build his first settlements. Evidence of early human existence is laid bare all across the Downs. Some of the most important ancient sites in Britain are found here. The South Downs' rich history, landscapes, and wildlife was finally recognized in 2010 when it became Britain's newest national park. What makes the South Downs so special is that this land has been shaped by people and that their relationship with it has continued unbroken right to the present day. It's early March, and I've come to help local sheep farmer Andrew Barr bring the ewes off the hill into the lambing barns.
Gilbert! And the idea is to sound like an old ram so the sheep come to you. That's my call from a sheep. Hurts your throat when you've got a sore throat.
Without sheep, the chalk grasslands that dominate the eastern end of the Downs would not exist. Their constant grazing keeps woodland at bay and has done for thousands of years. It's created one of the rarest landscapes on Earth.
And this tradition has been carrying on for thousands of years. And long may it thrive, long may it thrive.
Sunlight touches the head of the Long Man of Wilmington. Recent evidence suggests it was made in the 16th century, but some locals believe it dates back to Neolithic times and that this moment marked the beginning of spring. As the days lengthen, the rich green covers these hills again. But this is a fragile landscape. Only a thin layer of soil, in places no more than a few centimeters thick, covers the chalk. The chalk was formed over 65 million years ago, when this was an ancient seabed. It is made from the shells of microscopic algae called coccoliths, which sank to the sea floor, leaving vast chalk deposits made of the mineral calcite. Rain soaks fast into the highly porous chalk, creating a landscape that dries out very quickly. Yet the South Downs is one of the richest and most diverse landscapes in Britain. The open chalk downland is found almost exclusively in southern England. The dry soils provide the perfect conditions for some of Britain's rarest and most beautiful plants to flourish. About 30 species of orchid are found here, including the bee orchids. The petals of orchids perfectly mimic the bees, wasps, and other insects that pollinate them.
What a beautiful morning. I'm standing here just above the Cuckmere Valley, and I've come to meet one of the country's leading experts on butterflies, Neil Hume.
So this is our version of the rainforest. The diversity of plants is absolutely fantastic. It's a very, very rich environment, and it's so rich because the soil, it's what we call a skeletal soil. It's very, very low in nutrients, so these things are really having to compete.
This chalk downland is unique.
It is, but it takes an awful long time. This has taken thousands of years to form. It's the sheer number of different plants. You know, we're talking 40 species here in a tiny area, a square metre. We're talking 30 species at any one time of butterfly. Get that?
Oh, yes. There they go.
When you see the Adonis blue, you know it's the Adonis blue. The colour, it would not look out of place in a South American rainforest. If you said Adonis blue, corn bunting, yellowhammer, chalk hill blue, you know you're talking about the South Downs.
Absolutely.
It's that suite of species which is unique to this landscape. But the Adonis is...
the jewel.
It's the jewel in the crown. They should be prescribed by the National Health Service. They just bring instant happiness. They raise your spirits.
But 80% of these grasslands have been lost in the last 70 years. During the Second World War, with our supply routes under siege, they were ploughed up to feed the nation in the Dig for Britain campaign. It changed the face of the South Downs faster than at any time in recent history. The South Downs has always been at the front line against armies intent on conquering Britain. Its beaches and its hills are riddled with defenses. There are the remains of several major ancient settlements along the South Downs Way. This Iron Age hill fort at Cissbury is over 2,000 years old. It is the largest Iron Age hill fort on the South Downs. Men moved by hand 30,000 tons of chalk to construct this place. These ramparts would have had 10-foot high wooden walls completely surrounding the entire fortress. But this wasn't a place of aggression. This was a place of protection. This was a place where the local farmers stored their foods from the raiding parties of other Iron Age tribes looking for easy pickings. And if the farmers had their food stolen, they would have starved. So they went to all of this trouble to protect their families and their livelihood and their land. But there is something else here that drew early man to the Downs, and it is pivotal to the history of Britain. Cissbury is also home to the remains of over 270 mines. It's probably one of the first industrial landscapes that we have in Britain. And a lot of people were going to a lot of trouble to find just one thing. Flint. A man was probably sitting on the banks of this pit 6,000 years ago, knapping out arrowheads, spearheads, axes, knives, skinning tools. And these mines went down, some of them went down 12 meters. And underneath where I'm standing, there would have been shafts that fed into the ground horizontally, that were mined, they were dug out using antler horn. And most of those shafts probably, if they hadn't caved in, still exist. And people would have come here to trade. Flints from here have been found as far afield as East Anglia. This was wealth. This was the gold of its day. Today, our relationship with the land continues to evolve. With its dry, chalky soil and more sunlight than anywhere else in Britain, a new industry is emerging on the Downs. It's summer, and winemaker Peter Hall is hard at work at the Breaky Bottom vineyard.
It took my breath away when I came over the hill, because it was a sort of Wuthering Heights without the coldness. I did fall in head over heels in love with it straight away. Yeah.
Peter was one of the pioneers of the English winemaking industry in the 70s.
And it's almost exclusively sparkling wine, Champagne method sparkling wine. Really what we've got is very similar climate to Champagne, which is the northernmost region in France for growing grapes, and similar geology and soil type.
Today, the South Downs has about 40 wine producers, and many are international award winners. People have always been drawn to the South Downs. Many great writers and artists have been inspired by this place. Tennyson, Kipling, Hilaire Belloc, Jane Austen, just to name a few. And in the early 1900s, the Bloomsbury Group would gather for their early meetings in Charleston Farmhouse, which is just over that brow there. An influential group of writers, philosophers, and artists that included Virginia Woolf, her sister Vanessa Bell, and Duncan Grant. They painted everything they could get their hands on: the tables, the chairs, the piano. Their liberal attitude was a strong reaction to the strict Victorian view of the world that existed at the time, and their art reflected the softness, beauty, and intense femininity of these gently rolling hills.
There is something in the light, there is something in the soil here that really just gives you a sense of freedom. And I think that is what attracted so many to this place.
As I follow the South Downs Way west towards the middle of the park, much of the landscape turns to woodland. Just north of Chichester is Kingley Vale, one of Britain's most spectacular ancient woods. These yew trees are thought to be over 2,000 years old. Catherine Birch from Natural England is the reserve manager.
So the yew trees were very special here, but you get these really gnarled, twisted, ancient shapes which create this sort of wild feeling to the place. And people do say the trees here come alive and move around at night. This is another male yew tree, and what's really special about this tree, which is known as the grandfather tree, is that you see how it's put a branch down and it's rooted itself back into the ground here and then produced another generation, the next generation, and then it's rooted itself again in the ground and produced another generation. So there's 3 generations all still attached to this original male tree.
The male trees also produce pollen to fertilize the female yews in the forest. Once a year, over just a few days, they release their pollen together. And Kingley Vale erupts in clouds of yellow smoke.
A lot of the myths about the trees being immortal, they live for such a long time and they're slow growing, you can see why they're kind of associated with this eternal life.
It was in these wooded downs in the 18th century that one of our greatest naturalists, Reverend Gilbert White, transformed our view of the natural world and how we see ourselves within it. His home was here in Selborne, close to the northern boundary of the park. He lived in the 1700s, well before Darwin, when nature was considered as something that should be ruled over, controlled and tamed. Gilbert White was the first to challenge that view.
The original manuscript of the Natural History and Antiquities of Selborne and this writing these words have changed the world. Before Gilbert White, no one had written in detail about the natural world. No one had gone outside and sat down and looked and listened and been able from that to deduce the separation between species and the intimacies of genus. Gilbert White spent hours in these woods, observing detail. He was the first to identify the differences between the willow warbler, the wood warbler, and the chiffchaff by their song. He identified the harvest mouse as a separate species. He must have been here at night because he identified the nocturnal bat as a separate species. Really, he laid the foundation stone for the study of natural history and the environmental movement as we know it today, to such an extent that Charles Darwin declared that he stood on the shoulders of Gilbert White.
At the western end of the South Downs, the park fans out north across an area known as the Weald. It's a very different landscape with its own unique wildlife and history.
Look at this. This is Blackdown Hill. It's the highest point in Sussex, and it's a part of the national park that I was completely unaware of. This habitat was created by meltwater from the last ice age, which has eroded all the chalk, just leaving clay and acidic green sand. And that has created this rare habitat called lowland heath.
With its rare mix of dry heathland and ponds, this part of the Weald is of great value to wildlife. It is the only area in Britain that can claim to have all 12 native species of amphibians and reptiles. And just a couple of miles from here, on Marley Common, I'm hoping to find Britain's only venomous snake. Senior Ranger Matt Bramage from the National Trust and biologist Lucy Struthers have been tagging and tracking the adders here for 2 years.
We haven't caught this one before,
Okay.
so we're quite excited.
Oh, yes. Is it female?
Yeah.
Aunt, isn't she lovely? How old do you think she is now?
They can live up to 30 years.
I didn't know that.
No,
I didn't know that.
Amazing. And she will give birth in late August, September. Then she goes on a month-long feeding frenzy before retiring to hibernate. Typically, she'll be in the underground for 6 months.
Wow.
25 grams.
Once the tag is on, what information are you hoping to garner?
This year, I'm hoping to establish where they go to post-breeding. That would be a really important thing for us as land managers to know about.
The adders travel between their feeding and breeding areas on the pockets of heathland across the Weald. By understanding where they're going, Matt hopes to better protect them and the wildlife corridors they need to maintain a healthy population.
Very neat. In Australia, I saw a snake on the ground, and I said to the guy, you know, what happens if that bites you? And he said, if that one bites you, just sit down and have a smoke.
With its thick clay and acid soils, the Weald was of little value to man, and it remained sparsely inhabited for thousands of years. But that changed in the 16th century, when something of great value was found in the ground.
Time has a way of hiding histories. Looking out here, it's hard to imagine that during the 16th century, this was a hive of activity. There are 3 things here that are critical to the beginning of the iron industry in Britain. First of all, there was water to drive the bellows. Secondly, there was wood for charcoal. And lastly, this is the most important ingredient. This is iron ore, and it was probably dug up no more than 3 miles away from here.
Right here at the Fernhurst Furnace and on 15 other sites in the Western Weald, this was the place that seeded the Industrial Revolution. It produced the best iron in the country, where the cannon were made that defeated the Armada. From the water in the pond, and charcoal from the trees, and this little beauty from the ground. Across the South Downs Park, summer is drawing to a close. The farmers are bringing in the last of the crops. With more than 80% of the park now farmed, the wild areas that remain and the corridors that connect them are not just important refuges for wildlife. They're also important to people and have been for thousands of years.
the last week of September. In the morning, the grass is heavy with dew, the leaves are beginning to change color, and the bushes are ripe with haws and elderberries, sloes and damsons. I'm here to meet Lucinda Warner, who's a herbalist and who knows every flower and berry and leaf on the Downs.
Today she's gathering berries from hawthorns.
Here on the Downs, we get lots of these beautiful lone hawthorns. It berries so profusely, and yeah, it's full of these wonderful starches that would have been so important for our ancestors. Like, starch was one of the hardest foods, those kind of staples for them to come across. Well, I think there's actually a massive resurgence in interest in foraging and herbal medicine and wild foods. And I think a lot of that is because, I mean, you can see just being out here that the medicine is not just in the taking of the substance, it's in the picking, it's in the harvesting, it's in the being with the plant. The whole process becomes the medicine, really. We've got so many beautiful plants here. We're so lucky in the Downs that we have so many wildflowers growing on the chalk. Yarrow is a really great example of that. And then we've also got self-heal here. This one's gone past flowering now, but just the name, the fact that our ancestors chose to call it self-heal, says how much it was valued, really.
And so to our ancestors, this was a medicine chest, essentially.
Absolutely. I mean, everything had a use, it had a sacredness, some for food, some for medicine, some for tinder, some for shelter. I think, you know, today we talk very much about this idea of reconnecting with nature, but I think to our ancestors that would have been a laughable notion, because the idea that we weren't nature would have been a completely alien one.
Across the Downs, autumn takes hold. Winter visitors start to arrive. Buick swans fly in more than 2,500 miles from Siberia. They'll overwinter in the flooded river valleys. Short-eared owls arrive from their breeding grounds as far away as Scandinavia and Iceland. They'll stay here for 6 months, hunting for mice and voles along the hedgerows. In the forests, woodsmen coppice hazel and birch for fencing and to make charcoal, keeping the forest open for wildlife to flourish. On the chalk grasslands in the eastern Downs, rangers and volunteers turn to clearing the scrub, keeping the woods at bay, just as it has been done since Neolithic times, 7,000 years ago. As winter takes grip, the first snows begin to fall. In my local, it's folklight. Some of the Downland songs date back to Saxon times. Their music and words passed on through the ages. As the winter snow and rain seeps into the chalk, hundreds of springs across the Downs come to life. They flow into several rivers that have carved valleys through the South Downs. As water levels rise, the rivers spill across the floodplains, creating some of the most important wetlands in northern Europe. In the Arun Valley, Buick swans with their distinctive yellow beaks spend the winter grazing on water plants and grass. In the Western Downs, the springs flow out across the chalklands to create a very different kind of river.
Here is the source of two very special rivers. The Rother, which begins at the base of Grandfather's Bottom just there, and the Meon on the other side of the valley.
Fed by springs all year round, the Meon flows a short 21 miles down into the Solent. Its clear waters are under pressure from fertilizer and farm waste that leach into the river, but Nick Heisman of the South Downs National Park Authority has been working with the local community to clean it up.
The rain comes down on top of those downs, it filters through that chalk, and it comes out purified by the chalk, and then we end up with crystal clear. They call this gin clear water. Some hydrologists think that some of this water coming past us now in the river might have fallen 60 years ago. It's taken all that time to filter through the rock.
I didn't know that.
And this gives rise to an amazing amount of biodiversity.
By reducing pollution and widening the river edge habitat, the community has encouraged more birds to return and fish stocks to improve. And in recent years, a very special creature has come back to the Meon.
Waterfowl have returned. So we've been involved with the largest waterfowl reintroduction in the UK. It's been great.
After being wiped out locally by the American mink, the park has been working with the community to release more than 300 waterfowls back into the river. After an absence of 20 years, the river is also seeing the return of one of Britain's rarest predators. Assistant Ranger Laura Dean has set up remote cameras to film several platforms along the river.
We have currently 7 wildlife cameras out in the river now.
Yeah.
And this is on one of our sites.
No. That's extraordinary.
They've captured the first footage of otters in the South Downs for more than 20 years.
So the otters use the mink graphs to sprint on
Yes.
to sort of set out their territory.
Yes.
So a lot of these images are either the otters sprinting or smelling other otters that have sprinted on them.
It's just so lovely to see them, to know that they're here.
Yes.
And we've got breeding otter with cubs.
Fantastic.
This year, they've returned to the Rother. We've had the first recorded evidence for a long time on the Rother.
Really
exciting news.
That's fantastic.
Because we'd expect it here on the Meon, but to get it on the Rother, that means that we can start to see them move right across the rivers
Yeah, of
to the
course.
east of the Downs.
Of course.
Hopefully see them on the Cookme. You know.
Oh, can you imagine? The last hill. On the other side of the brow of this hill, St. Catherine's Hill, at the western edge of the park, the South Downs Way runs into Winchester, Journey's End. The ancient capital of England. And it was here that Alfred, in the 9th century, had Latin texts translated into English. And through his educational reforms, he fostered the birth of the English language, which was instrumental in tying the nation together. The South Downs is seared into our psyche. I love this land. The land that I found over the last year, this land of silver rivers, this land of winding sheep tracks across the faces of escarpments, this land that has a wealth of butterflies, a wealth of wildflowers. But most of all, what I've learned is that this land has been formed by many different peoples. And you can see their influence through history through the landscape, which they clearly love, in every single aspect of this extraordinary national park. And long may it thrive. Long may it be a place of welcome. And long may it be a haven for all life, human and natural.